کاخ سفید، واشنگتن دی سی. جین شارپ، نظریه پرداز نافرمانی مدنی و تئوریسین انقلاب‌های مخملین که تألیفاتی در این موضوع دارد. وی از اوامر CIA جهت نفوذ در کشورهای مورد نظر می باشد.
My name is Gene Sharp, and this is the work I do. We have never had any funding or support from the CIA. It just hasn't happened. Well, you've seen our office. You can see how well funded we are. Primarily, I try to understand the nature and potential of nonviolent forms of struggle as alternatives to violence and alternatives to passivity and submission. And I try to, in focusing on potentialities, I try to examine what's its potential against oppression, to undermine dictatorships, to apply defense against coup d'etat internally, and international aggression externally. In facing the most acute human problems of our world, it is often assumed that people need to use war and military means. But there's another, both simple and complicated possible response that can be at least as effective, and in many cases more effective, by striking at the roots of political power of the opponents, by large-scale group non-cooperation and defiance, to bring down dictatorships, undermine oppression, and provide defense of political and civil liberties. And how this can be done is what I do. If someone came to us and said, we have a very bad government at home, virtually a dictatorship or a very harsh dictatorship, so what should we do? Of course, I would tell them, I don't tell you what to do because I don't know your society, I don't know your country. But I would tell you, think. Don't just act. Don't just get an inspiration and go out and, I think we should do this or we should do that. And that actually happens. People do that. Get inspired to do something. And they may get inspired in ignorance and therefore do something that's really quite disastrous. Study. Study what is the nature of your regime. Where is it strong? But find out where it's weak. Because every dictatorship has its weaknesses. You have to know about nonviolent struggle, and you need to learn the ability to think strategically, to think how to plan your actions in the future so they can have impact and counteract the repression of your opponents. Frequently in revolutionary groups there will be people inside the movement who may offer opinions that are their genuine opinions. They may be the mouthpiece of your opponents. They may be actual employees of the intelligence services that are assigned to wreck this movement, to not only urge the opposition movements to use violence and create dissension within the resistors, but also to actually carry out violence in the midst of otherwise peaceful demonstration, or in extreme cases, even to carry out the violence on a larger scale, like political assassinations, and then blame it on the revolutionary movement. Then they would have a rationale and so-called justification for rounding up the revolutionaries and jailing many people who had nothing to do with these activities. But the people who are always pushing for violence and acts of sabotage really need to be isolated, and because they may well be the agents of your opponents. Don't fall for that. The nonviolent struggle has to be continued on a nonviolent basis, otherwise you erode and destroy your own power capacity, and with that the capacity to achieve your objectives. The idea that you are powerless is not true if you don't have these you don't have these guns. If the resistors choose to fight with violence, their opponent has all the advantages in that situation because you're choosing to fight with your opponent's best weapons. But you can choose to fight with a totally different kind of weapon than these nonviolent forms, which are much more difficult for the opponent to counteract if you're using your head and planning carefully. What about the population? Are they people who are willing to take risks? Are they willing to act in solidarity with each other? Or is everybody still afraid to even speak a word of opposition to a neighbor or someone on the street? If people are constantly afraid, then you have to overcome that fear by doing a variety of things which prove that it can happen and they can change things. But study and think and plan before you do anything, and learn how to plan strategically to make your action effective. No governing ruler will ever, who faces this kind of struggle mobilized by the population, will tell you it's weak. They will be screaming all over the place how terrible it is and how people should not be doing this to their nice, good, sweet government, which of course it isn't. How do you maintain the initiative? Because if you're always reacting to your opponent's initiative, and you're always in a position of reaction and sort of defensive activity, you're not so likely to win as if you take the charge of the struggle itself. You launch what's going to be the struggle. You maintain the initiative, expanding where possible the forms of struggle and the increased numbers of people joining the defiance. And then it's very hard for the governing dictatorship or other oppression to really keep in charge when that sort of thing is happening. If you who face great oppression today, if you who live under a brutal dictatorship, look back and see what has already happened, you will have to see that there's great power in this kind of struggle. What kind of other struggle could defeat the Soviet Union? By the action of a few 100,000 people in tiny little countries that were strategically important for the Soviet Union to maintain? What kind of struggle could otherwise achieve great accomplishments? If the dictators and the military rulers in those countries that have that kind of system are frightened of this, pay attention. Because if your opponents are frightened of this, this is exactly what you should be doing. This is exactly how you could liberate yourself. And if this happens, and then people begin to learn that they could use this even for defense against foreign aggression and occupations, to correct economic and social injustices, to restore the rights of the oppressed minorities, then the world indeed can be transformed in the coming decades. Dr. King gave a very important speech, which became known as the I Have a Dream speech. Sometimes people ask me what I really want. Do I have a dream? And I do. I dream that the oppressed people of the world will be able to learn from the available records and new experiences that this type of nonviolent struggle can be used to liberate all oppression and replace military and violent conflicts, so that you won't have to carry on struggles against terrorism anymore, because the people who might have become terrorists have instead chosen to use this kind of struggle to help out the oppressed people. this can change political systems throughout the world. It has a chance of doing that. My name is Gene Sharp, and that is my dream.